I think most of us, around my age and your age, we come to this idea of global population of one that is this exponentially growing global population, because that's the century that we were born into. World population in 1900 was 1.6 billion. And then by the end of the century was 6.1 billion. So that's what we know. We know this big growth. But what we don't necessarily realize unless we're looking for it is that the pace of global population growth really started slowing in the early 1960s. Around 1964, we see that rate of change start to decline. And I think about it like tectonic forces. We don't see what's moving underneath. And what we see, though, is people kind of piling on top. So where we are today in 2023 is it started to catch up. And so, of course, global population is still growing. We just hit 8 billion in November, and that's 2 billion more this century. But we're really probably only going to get a maximum of 2 billion more from this point ever. And what we really see then is the aging of the global population, fertility down everywhere. And in fact, over 30 countries already starting to shrink.
Fascinating about this notion of really thinking about the future. We already can tell the future, but I think average people walking on the street is not thinking like, oh, we're already slowing, but we are actually still moving forward in an exponential way, actually. I mean, if you think about it, in 1 century, we got 2 billion more people. That's a lot of people. And we expect to have 2 more billion, and this hardly slowing. But what you're really saying is, hold on for a second, there are a number of components to it, right? I mean, there's this end of how many kids we're having, and the other end is how many people are really dying or not dying.
Yeah, and I think also where that growth is happening has changed. And so in the book, I talk about this century, or at least this moment, as one of differential growth. So if last century was exponential, now we look at this century and most of the growth is happening in places where fertility is either still high. And so let's introduce something here called our replacement level fertility, which is basically 2, 1 per parent, keeps the population growth pretty steady, absent migration. So places where it's above replacement level, or where it was above replacement level until fairly recently, so that those cohorts of people of childbearing ages are relatively larger. And so that means we're looking at places like Central Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, versus Europe and East Asia, where populations in many countries are already starting to shrink because fertility declined a long time ago.